The last thing Lillian Fletcher remembered before diving under the heavy oak table was the sound of glass shattering against the wall beside her head. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a wild mustang as she curled herself into the tightest ball possible, praying that the shadows would swallow her whole. The saloon had emptied in seconds when Edgar started his rampage. No one wanted to get between a drunken man and his target, especially when that man was Edgar Monroe, the meanest ranch hand in Copper Creek. "Where are you, you worthless woman?" Edgar slurred, his boots scraping across the wooden floorboards. "Think you can embarrass me in front of the whole town? I'll teach you what happens to disobedient wives." Lillian pressed her trembling hand against her mouth to stifle a sob. The bruises from last week's lesson had barely faded, and the cut above her eyebrow still stung when she frowned. 3 years of marriage to Edgar had taught her that any resistance only made the beatings worse. The table above her shuddered as Edgar slammed his fist down on its surface. Bottles and glasses jumped and clinked together like nervous chimes. She could smell the whiskey on his boots, could see the spurs that had left scars on her legs more than once. "Found you." Edgar's face appeared as he bent down, lips twisted in a sneer that promised pain. His hand shot out to grab her ankle, fingers digging into her flesh through her thin stocking. "No," she cried, kicking frantically as he began to drag her across the floor. A shadow fell across them both, and suddenly Edgar's grip vanished. Lillian heard a grunt, followed by the solid thud of a body hitting the floor. When she dared to look, she saw Edgar sprawled on his back, and standing over him was a man she'd never seen before, tall, broad-shouldered, with dust from the trail still clinging to his denim and leather. "That's no way to treat a lady," the stranger said, his voice low and steady. He kept his eyes on Edgar but extended a hand toward Lillian's hiding place. "Madam, you're safe now." When Edgar scrambled to his feet with a roar, the stranger moved with surprising speed, delivering a precise punch that sent Edgar staggering back against the bar. "You best clear out," the stranger warned, his stance relaxed but ready. "Unless you're looking to visit the undertaker today." Edgar wiped blood from his mouth, eyes darting between the stranger and Lillian. "She's my wife," he spat. "This ain't your business." "I'm making it my business," the stranger replied, and something in his tone made Edgar hesitate. After a tense moment, Edgar pointed a shaking finger at Lillian. "This ain't over," he threatened, before backing toward the door and stumbling out into the dusty street. The stranger knelt beside the table where Lillian still cowered. His eyes were the color of the sky after a storm, and despite the hardness in his jawline, there was something gentle in his gaze. "He'll never find you again," he promised softly. "Not if you don't want him to." Lillian didn't know why, but she believed him. "I'm Owen Carson," he said, offering his hand again. "And I think you could use a friend right about now." Lillian hesitated only a moment before placing her trembling hand in his. "Lillian Fletcher, Monroe," she corrected herself bitterly, "though I wish I'd never taken that name." "Then perhaps it's time for a change, Mrs. Monroe," Owen said, helping her to her feet with surprising gentleness for hands so calloused. "Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is start over." As Lillian stood in the wreckage of the saloon, her husband's threats still ringing in her ears, she found herself wondering if this stranger might be right, if there could be a life beyond the fear she'd known for so long. What she didn't know then was how much her life was about to change, or that the trail ahead would lead her through both danger and hope before she'd find her way to freedom. The year was 1878, and in the small town of Copper Creek, Colorado, a woman's options were limited, especially a woman with a husband, no matter how cruel he might be. But as Owen Carson led her away from the scene of her humiliation, Lillian felt something she hadn't experienced in years: possibility. "We should get you somewhere safe," Owen said, scanning the street for any sign of Edgar. "He'll be back, and next time he'll bring friends." "I have nowhere to go," Lillian admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything I own is at his ranch, and he'd be waiting," Owen finished for her. He seemed to consider something for a moment. "I've got a room at the boarding house, Mrs." Wilson is a formidable woman. Edgar wouldn't dare cross her threshold. You can rest there while we figure out what's next. Lillian clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Owen's expression darkened briefly. Let's just say I've seen what men like your husband can do when nobody steps in. He tipped his hat slightly. Besides, my ma raised me better than to look the other way. As they walked the short distance to the boarding house, Lillian felt the stares of townsfolk following them. Copper Creek wasn't large, barely 800 souls, and news traveled faster than telegraph messages. By sundown, everyone would know that Lillian Monroe had fled her husband's fists with the help of a stranger, Mrs. Wilson, a stout widow with silver hair and sharp eyes, took one look at Lillian's bruised face and ushered them inside without a word. Only when they were seated in her small parlor did she speak. That man's been a menace since he was a boy, she said, setting a cup of tea in front of Lillian. You're not the first wife he's mistreated, though you might be the first to leave. Lillian's hands froze around the teacup. There were others, Mrs. Wilson nodded grimly. His first wife disappeared about 5 years back. Some say she ran off, others. She didn't finish the thought. I need to leave Copper Creek, Lillian said suddenly, the realization dawning with terrible clarity. He won't stop looking for me here. The stage doesn't come through until Friday, Mrs. Wilson said, and that's 3 days from now. Owen, who had been quiet until now, leaned forward. I've got a horse and supplies. I was heading to Silverton anyway looking for work in the mines. It's a 4-day ride, but it would get you far from here. You'd take me with you? Lillian asked, surprised. As far as Silverton, Owen confirmed. After that, you'd be free to go wherever you please. New name, new start. Lillian thought of the life she'd be leaving behind: a loveless marriage, isolation on Edgar's ranch, and the constant fear of his unpredictable rage. What did she have to lose? When can we leave? She asked. First light, Owen replied, but we'll need to be careful. Edgar has friends among the ranch hands if word gets to them that you're planning to flee. Mrs. Wilson stood suddenly. I'll prepare a room for you, dear, and I'll see what clothes I can find. You can't go riding across Colorado in that dress. As the older woman bustled out, Lillian found herself alone with Owen. In the soft lamplight, she could see him more clearly: the small scar along his jawline, the way his hands, though strong, moved with a certain care, as if accustomed to handling fragile things. Thank you, she said simply. I know this is a risk for you. Owen shook his head. Some risks are worth taking, Mrs. Monroe. Please call me Lillian, she said. Mrs. Monroe makes me feel like his property. Lillian then, Owen agreed with a slight smile. You should rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. Upstairs in the small, clean room Mrs. Wilson provided, Lillian lay awake long into the night. Every creak and whisper of wind made her tense, expecting Edgar to burst through the door. But as the hours passed and the house remained peaceful, she began to plan. She had $12 saved, sewn into the hem of her petticoat, money Edgar didn't know about. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to start somewhere new. She had no family left. Her parents had died of fever years ago, and her only brother had gone west and never returned. By the time dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, Lillian had made her decision. She would go with Owen Carson to Silverton, and from there, from there she would find her own path, whatever it might be. Mrs. Wilson provided her with practical clothes: a divided riding skirt, a sturdy blouse, and a jacket that had belonged to her son. They were a little large, but far more suitable for the journey than Lillian's own garments. Owen was waiting with his horse, a sturdy Palomino gelding, when Lillian descended the boarding house steps. He'd acquired a second mount, a dappled mare that regarded Lillian with curious eyes. Borrowed her from the livery, he explained. Called in a favor from the owner. He's no friend of Edgar's. They set out as the town was just beginning to stir, taking the western trail that would lead them into the mountains. Owen kept a careful eye behind them, but there was no sign of pursuit. Perhaps Edgar was still nursing his wounded pride and his bruises from the day before. As the sun climbed higher, they left the familiar landscape of Copper Creek behind. Lillian found herself relaxing slightly, though she knew they weren't truly safe yet. Edgar was not a man to forgive slights, and in his mind, her departure would be the greatest betrayal. "Have you always lived in Colorado?" Owen asked as they stopped to water the horses at a small stream around midday. Lillian shook her head. "I was born in Missouri. My father brought us west when I was 12, looking for better prospects." She traced patterns in the dirt with a stick. "He found work as a carpenter in Copper Creek, and we settled there. After my parents died, I had the house but no means to keep it. Edgar came courting, and he seemed solid. Reliable," she laughed bitterly. "Shows how poor a judge of character I was." "People show what they want you to see," Owen said, "until they don't have to anymore." Something in his tone made Lillian look up. "You sound like you know something about that." Owen was silent for a moment, adjusting the saddle on his horse. "I was married once," he finally said, "to a woman named Sarah. She was fragile, the kind of beauty that makes men want to protect it, but she had demons I couldn't fight for her." He took a deep breath. "She took her own life 3 years ago." "I'm sorry," Lillian said softly. Owen nodded, his eyes distant. "After I couldn't stay in our town, too many memories, so I've been drifting, taking work where I can find it." He glanced at her. "I guess we're both starting over in our own ways." As they continued their journey, the terrain grew more challenging. The trail wound through pine forests and along mountain ridges, offering breathtaking views that Lillian, despite her anxiety, couldn't help but admire. Living with Edgar, she'd rarely left the ranch. Now, the vastness of the landscape made her feel both small and somehow free. They made camp that night in a sheltered grove of aspens. Owen built a small fire and produced jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. It wasn't a feast, but Lillian was too tired to care. "We'll reach Elk Valley by tomorrow evening," Owen said as they ate. "There's a trading post there where we can resupply. After that, it's another 2 days to Silverton." Lillian nodded, watching the flames dance. "What's Silverton like?" "Growing," Owen replied. "The silver mines are bringing people from all over. It's rough in parts, but there are decent folks, too. A woman can find work there serving in a restaurant, maybe, or as a laundress." He hesitated. "Though I reckon a woman with your grace could aim higher." Lillian felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected compliment. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with genuine admiration. "I'm not afraid of hard work," she said. "I just want peace, a place where I don't have to be afraid." Owen's eyes reflected the firelight as he looked at her across the flames. "You deserve that much and more, Lillian." They slept on opposite sides of the fire, Owen insisting that Lillian take the only blanket he had. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Every snapping twig in the forest made her start awake, imagining Edgar and his men closing in around them. During one such moment of wakefulness, she found Owen watching her, his back against a tree trunk, a rifle across his lap. "You should sleep," she whispered. "I will," he assured her. "Just making sure the night stays quiet." In that moment, Lillian realized how long it had been since she'd felt protected rather than threatened by a man's presence. The feeling was so foreign that it brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She turned away quickly, not wanting him to see her weakness. Morning brought mist and a light drizzle that soon turned to steady rain. They traveled wrapped in oilskins that Owen had packed, the horses picking their way carefully along the increasingly muddy trail. By mid-afternoon, the rain had stopped, but the world remained draped in low, hanging clouds that obscured the mountaintops. The forest seemed to close in around them, dripping and secretive. "Something's not right," Owen said suddenly, reining in his horse. He was staring at a break in the trees ahead, his expression tense. "What is it?" Lillian asked, her heart immediately beginning to race. Before he could answer, a shot rang out, the bullet splintering bark from a tree just inches from Owen's head. Lillian screamed as Owen spurred his horse forward, reaching back to grab her mare's reins. "Ride," he shouted, and they plunged into the forest, leaving the trail behind. More shots followed them, but the trees provided cover, and soon the sounds faded behind them. They didn't slow until they reached a rocky outcropping that offered some shelter. "Was it Edgar?" Lillian gasped, her hands shaking as she dismounted. Owen shook his head grimly. "Road agents, most likely. They prey on travelers in these parts." He examined both horses quickly. Doesn't look like any of us were hit, thank God. Lillian leaned against the rocks, trying to steady her breathing. Will they follow us? Not if they're smart, Owen said. We're off the main trail now and they won't know which way we've gone, but we'll have to be more careful from here on. No fire tonight. They made cold camp in a dense thicket as darkness fell, eating dried fruit and jerky in silence. Without the fire, the mountain night was bitterly cold. Lillian found herself shivering despite the blanket. Here, Owen said quietly, moving closer to her. We'll share body heat. It's the only sensible thing in these conditions. Lillian hesitated only briefly before allowing him to settle beside her, his back against the same tree trunk, his arm lightly around her shoulders. She told herself it was merely practical, but she couldn't deny the comfort his presence provided or the way her heart quickened at his proximity. My father used to say that trouble comes in threes, she murmured after a while. First Edgar, then the road agents. I wonder what the third will be. Owen chuckled softly. Let's hope your father was wrong just this once. Despite the danger and discomfort, Lillian slept better that night than she had in years, lulled by the steady rhythm of Owen's breathing and the solid warmth of him beside her. They woke to clearer skies and continued their journey, now keeping well away from the main trail. Owen seemed to know the country well enough to navigate by landmarks and the position of the sun. By late afternoon, they glimpsed smoke rising from chimneys in the distance. Elk Valley, Owen announced. We'll approach carefully. If anyone's looking for you, this would be a logical place to wait. The trading post was a collection of sturdy log buildings clustered around a central yard. A few horses were tied at hitching posts, and a wagon stood empty near the main building. Owen left Lillian hidden in the trees while he scouted ahead, returning after 20 minutes with a relieved expression. Seems quiet enough, he reported. No sign of Edgar or his men. The storekeeper says the stage came through yesterday heading south, so that might work in our favor if Edgar's looking. He might think you took it. They entered the trading post together, though Owen suggested Lillian keep her hat pulled low. The interior was dim and crowded with goods of every description: tools, clothing, foodstuffs, and sundries needed by settlers and travelers alike. While Owen purchased supplies, Lillian browsed the shelves, marveling at items she hadn't seen in years. On a whim, she selected a small pot of lavender-scented salve and a simple comb made of tortoiseshell. When she placed them on the counter, Owen added them to his purchases without comment. The storekeeper, a weathered man with an impressive mustache, chatted amiably as he wrapped their goods. Heading to Silverton, you say? Booming town these days. Not as rough as it was a few years back. Even got a proper hotel now, not just boarding houses. As they were about to leave, the door opened, and Lillian froze as two men entered. They weren't Edgar's men, but something about their hard eyes and the way they surveyed the store made her tense. Owen noticed immediately. Time we were on our way, he said casually, guiding Lillian toward the door with a light touch at her elbow. One of the men stepped slightly into their path. Ain't seen you folks around before, he said, his tone falsely friendly. Just passing through, Owen replied evenly. The man's eyes lingered on Lillian. Pretty companion you've got. My wife, Owen said without hesitation, and Lillian felt his arm slide protectively around her waist. And we've got a long ride ahead of us. Something in Owen's stance must have warned the men off because they stepped aside, though their eyes followed them all the way out the door. Road agents, Lillian whispered once they were outside. Owen nodded grimly. Same ones who shot at us, I'd wager. We'd best not linger. They made good time that afternoon, pushing the horses harder than before. Owen seemed to know exactly where he was heading, leading them to a small cabin nestled against a cliff face, well hidden from casual observation. Trapper's cabin, he explained as they dismounted. Abandoned now, but I've used it before. We'll be safe here for the night. The cabin was rustic but sound, with a stone fireplace and a rough wooden platform that served as a bed. Owen got a fire going while Lillian arranged their supplies, working together with an easy coordination that surprised her. As darkness fell outside, they shared a simple meal of beans, dried apples, and the fresh bread Owen had purchased at the trading post. The fire cast dancing shadows on the log walls, and for the first time since leaving Copper Creek, Lillian felt truly warm. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For saying I was your wife back there, it was quick thinking." Owen looked up from cleaning his revolver. Seemed the simplest way to discourage them. He hesitated. "I hope it didn't offend you." "No," Lillian said softly. "It didn't offend me." Their eyes met across the small space, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, perhaps, or a possibility neither had acknowledged before. Owen looked away first, returning his attention to his gun with deliberate focus. "We should reach Silverton by tomorrow evening," he said after a while. "You'll need to decide what you want to do from there." Lillian nodded, though the thought of parting ways with Owen brought an unexpected pang. "I've been thinking about that. I could take in washing or mending. I'm good with a needle." "You shouldn't have to scrub other people's clothes to survive," Owen said, a hint of fierceness in his tone. "You're educated, aren't you? I've noticed how you speak." "My mother taught school before she married," Lillian admitted. "She made sure I could read and cipher well, but I don't have any formal training. Silverton's growing fast. They need teachers for all the children arriving with the minors," Owen suggested. "You could inquire at the school." The idea took root in Lillian's mind, blossoming with possibility. Teaching, creating a safe place for children to learn and grow, it seemed like a dream after the nightmare of her marriage. "I might," she said, smiling genuinely for what felt like the first time in years. "I just might." That night, with only one bed platform in the cabin, they again slept close together. Lillian told herself it was merely practical, but she couldn't deny the comfort she found in Owen's presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the solid warmth of him beside her. Just before dawn, Lillian woke with a start from a nightmare in which Edgar had found her, his hands closing around her throat. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she felt Owen's arm around her waist, his body curled protectively behind hers, and remembered. She should have moved away. A respectable woman would have, but the simple human contact after years of fear and pain was too precious to relinquish. Instead, she remained still, savoring the safety she felt in his embrace, and eventually drifted back to sleep. When she next woke, sunlight was streaming through the cabin's single window, and Owen was already up, preparing coffee over the revived fire. If he remembered their closeness during the night, he gave no sign of it. "Should be good weather for riding today," he commented, handing her a tin cup of strong, black coffee. "We'll reach Silverton before sunset if we make good time." Lillian sipped the coffee, finding its bitterness strangely comforting. And then Owen hesitated. "And then you start your new life, I suppose. And you?" she asked, not quite meeting his eyes. "Will you stay in Silverton?" "For a while," he said. "Long enough to find work, at least." They set out as the morning mist was still rising from the valley below. The trail grew steeper as they climbed higher into the mountains, but the views were magnificent, vast forests stretching to distant peaks, their summits still capped with snow despite the summer warmth. By midday, they had crossed the highest pass and were beginning the descent toward Silverton. The terrain was rockier now, the trail switching back and forth along the mountainside. They rode single file, Owen leading the way with careful attention to the path ahead. They had just rounded a sharp bend when Owen's horse suddenly reared, spooked by something on the trail. Lillian's mare, following close behind, shied violently to the side. Unprepared, Lillian felt herself slipping from the saddle, a scream torn from her throat as she fell toward the steep drop-off at the edge of the trail. Owen's reaction was instantaneous. Somehow he was off his horse and lunging toward her, catching her arm just as she began to slide over the edge. For one terrible moment, they both teetered on the brink, rocks and dirt crumbling beneath them. Then, with a powerful heave, Owen pulled her back to safety, both of them collapsing onto the trail. They lay there for a moment, breathing hard, Owen's arms still around her. Lillian could feel his heart racing against her back. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. "No," she managed, though her whole body was trembling with the aftermath of terror. "Thanks to you." Owen helped her sit up, his hands gentle as he checked her for injuries despite her assurance. When he was satisfied she was unharmed, he retrieved the horses, which had fortunately stopped a short distance up the trail. "What spooked them?" Lillian asked as Owen helped her back into the saddle. Owen frowned, examining the trail. "Mountain lion, maybe, or a bear." He looked up at her, his expression serious. "That was too close. We'll take it slower from here." They continued with greater caution, Owen frequently glancing back to ensure Lillian was secure in her saddle. The trail gradually widened as they descended, eventually merging with a more traveled road that showed signs of wagon traffic. By late afternoon, they caught their first glimpse of Silverton nestled in the valley below. Even from a distance, Lillian could see it was larger than Copper Creek, with multiple streets laid out in a grid and the telltale industrial structures of mining operations on the outskirts. "It's bigger than I expected," she commented as they paused to rest the horses. "About 2,000 people now," Owen said. "It'll be 5,000 in another year if the silver holds out." He pointed to various landmarks. "That's the main street there. The building with the tall chimney is the assay office. Beyond it is the Grand Imperial Hotel, finest place in town, though that's not saying much yet." As they rode into Silverton just as the sun was setting, Lillian felt a strange mixture of hope and apprehension. This would be her new home, at least for now. These streets would become familiar, these buildings landmarks in a life she was only beginning to imagine. Owen led them to a modest boarding house on a side street, away from the saloons and gaming houses that dominated one end of the main thoroughfare. The sign above the door read, "Mrs. Abernathy's Respectable Accommodations for Ladies and Gentlemen." Mrs. Abernathy herself answered their knock, a tall, angular woman with sharp eyes but a kind mouth. She looked them over with professional assessment. "We need 2 rooms," Owen said. "My friend has traveled a long way and needs a safe place to stay." If Mrs. Abernathy had any thoughts about their relationship, she kept them to herself. "I've 1 room available now," she said. "Another will open up tomorrow when Mr. Perkins leaves for Denver." "You're welcome to the parlor for tonight, sir." Once they were settled, Lillian in a small but clean room upstairs, their supplies stowed away, Owen suggested they find a meal. "There's a decent restaurant near the hotel," he said. "Nothing fancy, but the food is good." The restaurant was crowded but not rowdy, filled mostly with merchants and the better class of miners rather than the rough element that populated the saloons. They found a small table in a corner, and Lillian realized with a start that this was the first time she had dined in public since her wedding day. "It feels strange," she confessed as they waited for their food, "to be sitting in a restaurant like normal people." Owen's expression softened. "You are normal, Lillian. It's Edgar who isn't." He hesitated, then reached across the table to briefly touch her hand. "Don't let him steal any more of your life than he already has." Their food arrived, hearty beef stew with fresh bread, and they ate with the appetite that comes from days of trail rations. As they were finishing, the restaurant door opened, and a well-dressed man entered, accompanied by a woman in an elegant blue dress. Owen stiffened slightly. "The mayor," he murmured to Lillian, "and that's his wife." Lillian watched the couple as they were seated at a prominent table. "They seem important. He owns one of the larger mines," Owen explained, "and she runs the school board." His eyes met Lillian's meaningfully. "Might be worth introducing yourself before you leave Silverton." Lillian felt a flutter of both fear and excitement at the idea. "Do you really think I could be a teacher?" "I think you can be anything you set your mind to," Owen replied with a certainty that warmed her from within. After dinner, they walked slowly back to the boarding house, the streets now lit with lamps that cast pools of golden light on the wooden sidewalks. Miners and townspeople moved about their evening business, and for the first time, Lillian allowed herself to imagine being part of this community, building a life here, free from fear. At the boarding house, they paused on the porch, neither quite ready to end the evening. "What will you do tomorrow?" Lillian asked. "Look for work," Owen replied. "The mines are always hiring, or I might try the livery. I'm good with horses." Lillian nodded, suddenly realizing how little she actually knew about this man who had risked so much to help her. Have you been a cowboy all your life? Owen smiled slightly. Among other things. I was raised on a cattle ranch in Texas, rode with trail herds for a few years, did some scouting for the army during the troubles with the Comanche. His expression darkened briefly. Seen my share of the good and bad this country has to offer. And yet you stopped to help a stranger, Lillian said softly. You weren't a stranger, Owen replied, his voice equally quiet. Not really, I knew you the moment I saw you. When Lillian looked confused, he clarified, not you specifically, but someone who needed help, someone worth helping. They stood in silence for a moment, the night sounds of the town washing around them, piano music from a distant saloon, the murmur of voices, the occasional burst of laughter. I should let you rest, Owen finally said. It's been a long day. Yes, Lillian agreed, though she made no move to enter the house. Owen, thank you for everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Live your life, he said simply. Be happy, that's repayment enough. On impulse, Lillian rose on her tiptoes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek, her lips brushing against the slight stubble along his jaw. Then, before he could respond, she turned and hurried inside, her heart racing as if she'd done something far more daring than a simple gesture of gratitude. In her room, Lillian sat on the edge of the narrow bed, touching her fingers to her lips. She felt changed somehow, as if the journey had transformed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. For the first time in years, she was making her own choices, following her own path. And for the first time since Edgar had slipped a ring onto her finger, she was allowing herself to feel something for a man, something that wasn't fear. The next morning brought practical concerns. Lillian counted her meager savings, the $12 sewn into her petticoat, and realized she would need to find work immediately if she was to afford even the modest room at Mrs. Abernathy's. Owen had already left when she came downstairs, though he'd left a message with Mrs. Abernathy that he would return by evening. The older woman studied Lillian with shrewd eyes as she served her breakfast in the small dining room. Mr. Carson tells me you're looking for a fresh start, she said, pouring coffee. Yes, Lillian replied cautiously. I'm hoping to find work here in Silverton. Mrs. Abernathy nodded. Decent work for a lady isn't always easy to come by in these mining towns, but I know Margaret Wilson, the mayor's wife, is looking for someone to help at the school. The number of children in town has doubled in the past year, and Miss Turner can't manage them all alone. Lillian's pulse quickened. I was hoping for something like that. I'm educated, though I don't have formal training as a teacher. More education than most in these parts, I'd wager, Mrs. Abernathy said with a sniff. I'd be happy to write you a note of introduction if you'd like to call on Mrs. Wilson today. Armed with the note and wearing her cleanest dress, still travel-worn but presentable, Lillian made her way to the Wilson residence, an impressive two-story house on the town's best street. A maid showed her into a parlor decorated with an elegance that seemed out of place in the rugged mining town. Margaret Wilson was younger than Lillian had expected, perhaps 30, with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She read Mrs. Abernathy's note with interest. So you're seeking employment, Mrs. Fletcher, Lillian said firmly, deciding in that moment to reclaim her maiden name. Lillian Fletcher. If Mrs. Wilson noticed the absence of a wedding ring, she didn't comment. And you have teaching experience, not formally, Lillian admitted. But my mother was a teacher before her marriage, and she educated me thoroughly. I've always loved children, and I'm patient and organized. Mrs. Wilson considered this. Our need is pressing. Miss Turner has 47 pupils now, ages 6 to 15, and more arriving weekly. We've been discussing hiring an assistant teacher for the younger children. She fixed Lillian with a direct gaze. The pay is $30 a month, not generous, but it includes a room at the schoolhouse if you need it. $30 a month was more than Lillian had ever had to herself in her life. And a room at the schoolhouse would solve her housing concerns once she could no longer afford Mrs. Abernathy's. I would be very interested, she said carefully. Good, we'll try you for a month, beginning Monday, Mrs. Wilson decided. You can observe Miss Turner's methods this week to prepare. If you prove suitable, the position could become permanent. Lillian left the Wilson home feeling as if she were walking on air, a teaching position, a room of her own, a salary that would allow her independence. It seemed too perfect to be true, and a small part of her waited for the dream to shatter. That evening, she shared her news with Owen over dinner, his face lit up with genuine pleasure at her success. "I told you that you could do it," he said, raising his coffee cup in a toast. To Silverton's newest teacher. Lillian clinked her cup against his, unable to stop smiling. "And what about you? Any luck finding work?" "As a matter of fact, yes," Owen replied. "I spoke with the owner of the livery stable. He needs someone who knows horses, and he's offering fair wages. It's not glamorous work, but it will do for now." "So you're staying in Silverton?" Lillian asked, trying to sound casual despite the surge of happiness his words brought. Owen looked at her steadily. "For a while at least. I'd like to see how you fare in your new life." The week passed in a blur of activity. Lillian spent her days at the schoolhouse, observing Miss Turner, a capable if somewhat strict young woman who seemed relieved at the prospect of assistance. The children were a mix of miners' offspring, merchants' sons and daughters, and a few from the scattered farms and ranches in the surrounding valleys. They regarded Lillian with curiosity but not hostility. In the evenings, she would meet Owen for dinner, and they would exchange stories of their day. He had settled into his work at the livery, earning the respect of his employer with his knowledge and work ethic. Though they were just beginning their new lives in Silverton, there was already a comforting routine to their interactions. On Sunday, with no school or work to attend to, Owen suggested they explore the town properly. The day was clear and cool, perfect for walking. They visited the shops along Main Street, paused to watch a group of children playing with hoops in a small square, and finally made their way to a grassy knoll overlooking the town. "It's beautiful here," Lillian said as they sat on a fallen log, looking down at Silverton spread before them, the mountains rising majestically behind. "Different kind of beauty than the plains," Owen agreed, "but it grows on you." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the breeze ruffling Lillian's hair, which she had begun to wear looser, freed from the severe style Edgar had insisted upon. "Are you afraid?" Owen asked suddenly. Lillian considered the question. "Of Edgar finding me, sometimes, but less each day." She looked at him. "You've helped me feel safe again. I didn't think that was possible." Owen's gaze was warm as it rested on her face. "You're stronger than you know, Lillian. You always were. You just needed a chance to remember it." Their eyes held for a long moment, and Lillian felt the same shift in the air she had noticed in the trapper's cabin, a sense of possibility, of something precious and fragile forming between them. The moment was broken by the sound of a distant church bell calling the faithful to afternoon services. "We should head back," Lillian said reluctantly. "I want to prepare for tomorrow." As they walked down the hill, their hands brushed once, twice, and on the third time, Owen gently captured her fingers in his. Lillian didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed her hand to remain in his, warm and secure, all the way back to town. Lillian's first day as assistant teacher went better than she had dared to hope. Miss Turner assigned her the youngest pupils, 15 children between 6 and 8 years old, while she herself taught the older students. Lillian led her charges to a corner of the large schoolroom that had been partitioned with a curtain, creating a smaller space that felt more manageable. The children watched her with wide eyes as she introduced herself and outlined her expectations. By lunchtime, she had learned all their names and begun to understand their individual personalities and abilities. By the end of the day, she was exhausted but exhilarated. "You have a natural gift," Miss Turner commented as they straightened the schoolroom after the children had left. "The little ones responded well to you." "Thank you," Lillian said, surprised and pleased by the praise. "I enjoyed it more than I expected." "Teaching is a calling," Miss Turner said seriously. "Those who are meant for it find joy in it despite the challenges." She hesitated. "Mrs. Wilson mentioned you might be interested in the room here at the school." The schoolhouse had a small apartment at the back, 2 rooms, and a kitchenette that had been added for the teacher's use. Miss Turner, who lived with her sister's family, had never occupied it. "Yes," Lillian confirmed. If that's still available. It is, and you're welcome to it, Miss Turner said. It's modest but private. You could move in this weekend if you like. That evening, when Lillian shared the news with Owen, she was surprised to see a flicker of something like dismay cross his face. Is something wrong? She asked. No, he said quickly. It's good news. You'll save money living at the school. But, Lillian prompted, sensing his reservation. Owen sighed. It's nothing, just Mrs. Abernathy's is closer to the livery. I've grown used to our dinners together. Lillian felt a warm glow at his admission. We can still have dinner together, she assured him. The school isn't so far. Over the next few weeks, they settled into a new pattern. Lillian threw herself into teaching, discovering a talent and passion for it that surprised and delighted her. The children responded to her gentle but firm approach, and even Miss Turner, initially reserved, began to treat her as a colleague rather than an assistant. Owen continued his work at the livery, though he mentioned occasionally that he was saving for something more permanent. They still met most evenings for dinner, and on Sundays, they would explore the area around Silverton, riding into the mountains or picnicking by the river that ran through the valley. Their relationship existed in a space between friendship and courtship, undefined but deepening with each passing day. Owen never pressed for more, seeming content to let things develop at their own pace. Lillian, still healing from the wounds of her marriage, was grateful for his patience. One evening in late September, as they walked back to the schoolhouse after dinner, Owen seemed unusually quiet. When they reached the school, he hesitated on the steps. Lillian, he began, then stopped, seeming to search for words. What is it? She asked, concerned by his serious expression. Owen took a deep breath. I've been thinking about the future, about staying in Silverton permanently. Lillian's heart quickened. You have, he nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. I've been saving to buy into a business. Johnson, my employer at the livery, is getting older. He's looking for a partner, someone who might eventually take over. Owen, that's wonderful, Lillian said sincerely. It could be, he agreed, but before I commit to anything, I wanted to, that is, I needed to know. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I'm not saying this right. Lillian waited, hardly daring to breathe. I care for you, Lillian, Owen finally said, the words coming in a rush. More than I thought possible after Sarah. If there's any chance that you might someday feel the same, I'd stay here and build a life. But if not, if you need more time or if your feelings are only friendship, I'd understand. I just need to know. Lillian felt tears gathering in her eyes, but they were tears of a joy she had almost forgotten how to feel. Owen, she said softly, I already feel the same. For a moment, he looked as if he couldn't believe what he'd heard. Then, slowly, reverently, he reached out to cup her face in his hands. May I? He whispered. Lillian nodded, and Owen bent to kiss her, a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened as she responded. His arms slid around her waist, drawing her closer, and Lillian found herself holding onto his shoulders as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the day you walked out of Mrs. Abernathy's in your new dress, looking like spring after a long winter. Lillian laughed softly. And I've wanted you to, though I was afraid to admit it even to myself. They stood together in the gathering twilight, reluctant to part, until a cool breeze reminded them of the advancing autumn. I should go in, Lillian said regretfully. Owen nodded but stole one more quick kiss before stepping back. I'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow, she agreed with a smile that stayed with her long after she closed the schoolhouse door. The following weeks were the happiest of Lillian's life. Her teaching continued to thrive, with even Mrs. Wilson commenting on the progress of the younger children under her care. Her relationship with Owen blossomed, their connection deepening with each conversation, each shared experience. By November, Owen had finalized his partnership with Johnson at the livery. The business was now Johnson & Carson's Livery and Blacksmithing, with a freshly painted sign that Owen proudly showed to Lillian the day it was hung. Next year, if all goes well, I'll buy out his remaining share, Owen explained as they admired the sign. He wants to retire to Denver where his daughter lives. I'm so proud of you, Lillian said, squeezing his hand. Owen looked at her with an expression that made her heart skip. I couldn't have done it without you, Lillian. You gave me a reason to put down roots again. As winter settled over the mountains, bringing snow that transformed Silverton into a glittering wonderland, their courtship continued. They were a recognized couple now, invited together to dinners and social events. Miss Turner had even taken to making knowing remarks about wedding bells in the spring. The idea didn't frighten Lillian as it once might have. Owen was nothing like Edgar. His strength was never used to intimidate, his words never designed to wound. With him, she felt not owned but cherished, not controlled but supported. One snowy evening in early December, Owen invited Lillian to dinner at the Grand Imperial Hotel, a rare splurge that signaled a special occasion. The hotel's dining room was the finest in town, with white tablecloths and real silver cutlery brought all the way from Denver. Owen had dressed in his best for the occasion, a dark suit that made his shoulders look even broader, his blue eyes more striking. Lillian wore a dress she had made herself, deep green wool that complemented her auburn hair, which she wore loose around her shoulders the way Owen preferred it. Over dessert apple pie with real cream, Owen reached into his pocket and produced a small box. Lillian, he said, his voice low and earnest, these past months have been the happiest of my life. When I found you under that table in Copper Creek, I never imagined where the road would lead us. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small but perfect pearl. I know your first marriage was a prison. I want to offer something different, a partnership, a home, a life where you're free to be exactly who you are. Lillian looked at the ring, then at Owen's face so dear to her now, so full of hope and love. I'm asking you to marry me, he continued when she didn't immediately speak. Not to be my possession, but my companion, my equal, my love. Tears blurred Lillian's vision as she reached across the table to touch his face. Yes, she said simply. Yes, Owen, I'll marry you. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit as if it had always belonged there. It was my grandmother's, he explained. My mother gave it to me before she died, said I should save it for a special woman. He brought her hand to his lips. She would have loved you, Lillian. They were married on the first day of spring, 1879, in a simple ceremony at Silverton's small church. Miss Turner was Lillian's matron of honor, and Johnson stood up with Owen. Mrs. Wilson had helped organize a reception at the town hall, where it seemed half of Silverton gathered to congratulate the newlyweds. Never seen a more deserving couple, Mrs. Abernathy declared, raising her glass in a toast. To the Carsons, may your happiness be as enduring as these mountains. Owen had purchased a small house on the edge of town, nothing grand, but solid, with a garden plot for Lillian and room for them to grow. That night, as he carried her over the threshold, Lillian felt a sense of rightness so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Welcome home, Mrs. Carson, Owen said softly, setting her gently on her feet in their front parlor. Home, Lillian repeated, the word like a prayer on her lips. After all the fear, all the running, she had finally found where she belonged, not in a place, but with a person. Later, as they lay in each other's arms in the bedroom that would be theirs for all the nights to come, Owen traced the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers. Are you happy? He asked. Lillian smiled up at him in the moonlight streaming through their window. More than I ever believed possible, she answered truthfully. You saved me, Owen. He shook his head slightly. No, love, you saved yourself. You had the courage to run, to start over. I just helped with the details. Then we saved each other, Lillian amended, thinking of how lost Owen had been when they met, drifting without purpose after Sarah's death. That we did, he agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. And we'll keep doing so every day for the rest of our lives. In the years that followed, Lillian often thought back to that moment of terror under the table in the Copper Creek saloon, how close she had come to accepting that fear was all her life would ever hold. If Owen hadn't stepped in, if she hadn't found the courage to leave, her story might have ended so differently. Instead, she built a life filled with purpose and joy. She continued teaching until their first child was born, a daughter they named Hope, followed 2 years later by a son, Benjamin. Owen's business prospered, expanding to include a freight operation that served the growing communities throughout the San Juan Mountains. They never forgot how their journey together began. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, they would sit on their porch and watch the sunset painting the mountains in hues of gold and pink. "Do you ever regret it?" Owen asked once. "Leaving everything behind to ride off with a stranger?" Lillian leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand finding his with the ease of long practice. "Not for a moment," she said. "Some journeys look like running away, but they're really running toward exactly where you're meant to be." And as Owen's arm tightened around her, Lillian knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not under a table hiding from violence, but here, in the circle of love they had created together.